Every nation has stories, but America has secrets. Stories that were hidden because they were dangerous. Moments buried because the truth was too heavy. Decisions buried so deep that even time itself tried to forget them. But tonight, we're going to unearth them. We're going to walk through the nights when the United States stood at the edge of disappearing, the hours when a single breath, a single bullet, a single whisper changed everything. Events your teachers never mentioned. Events historians still debate. Events that, had they shifted by even a fraction, would have rewritten the world you wake up in. This is the untold story of America. It was June 1776. Manhattan was humid, swampy, and ripe for invasion. Washington's army, exhausted, hungry, and hauntingly young, camped restlessly near the harbor. Across the water, tens of thousands of British soldiers waited on their ships, like wolves eyeing wounded prey. But the British commanders had a different strategy in mind. Why fight an entire army when you can remove one man and end the war in a single blow? The plan was simple: assassinate George Washington quietly and crush the rebellion before it spread. A network of spies, some loyal to the crown, some pretending to be patriots, passed coded notes in taverns, farmhouses, even churches. One note reached the hands of a man named Thomas Hickey, a member of Washington's own personal guard. Hickey wasn't a hero. He was charming, reckless, and greedy, and he was willing to betray Washington for the right price. The British offered that price. The plan was set: stop Washington's escape route, insert a poisoned meal, and send forged messages to lure him away from his officers. But the plan did not fall apart because of Washington's vigilance. It failed because of a young soldier, barely 17, who noticed a stranger walking where he shouldn't. The stranger carried papers granting access to the general, but the boy noticed something off. The seal was smudged, the ink smelled fresh, and the stranger avoided eye contact. He alerted his superior. The man was detained, and under pressure, the conspiracy unraveled. Hickey was tried, convicted, and hanged. Washington never spoke of it publicly, but in a private letter he wrote one chilling line: had the plot succeeded, our cause would have died before it was born. That night, saved by a teenager whose name vanished from the record, is the only reason the United States exists today. 8 decades later, America stood on the edge again. It was 1862. Abraham Lincoln sat alone in the dimly lit telegraph office. Paper after paper carried news of catastrophe. Union armies were losing. European powers considered supporting the Confederacy. The nation he'd sworn to protect was ripping itself apart. Lincoln held in his hands a proclamation he had written and rewritten dozens of times that it was controversial, radical, explosive. It would free millions of enslaved men, women, and children, but only in rebel states. He feared it would fracture the border states, that he feared it would cost him the war, that he feared it might even cost him his life. He placed the document on the desk, and hesitated. Then the door creaked open. In stepped Salmon P. Chase, Secretary of the Treasury. He looked at Lincoln, tired, gaunt, shadows beneath his eyes, and said something historians still argue about. Chase said, "Mr. President, history will judge this moment. But more importantly, you must decide whether you will live your life judged by fear or by purpose." Lincoln nodded once. He dipped the pen into the inkwell, his hand trembled. And in that quiet telegraph room, with the nation collapsing around him, he signed the first version of the Emancipation Proclamation. That single moment, just one signature, turned the Civil War from a political crisis into a moral crusade. It kept Europe out of the conflict. It inspired thousands of enslaved people to escape and join Union lines. It reshaped the entire identity of the war, from preserving the Union to redefining freedom. A lesser leader might have waited. A cautious leader might have postponed it. But Lincoln, alone, exhausted, unsure, chose the path that changed America forever. Everyone knows Washington, Jefferson, Adams, Franklin. But America had other founders. Men and women whose names didn't survive the textbooks. People like George Mason, who wrote a Declaration of Rights so influential that Jefferson practically copied sections of it into the Bill of Rights. Yet Mason refused to sign the Constitution because it didn't protect individual freedoms strongly enough. Or Ona Judge, who escaped the household of George Washington himself. Her daring flight forced Americans to confront a truth they didn't want to, that even the first president struggled with the contradictions at the heart of a free nation. Or Sybil Ludington, the 16-year-old girl who rode twice as far as Paul Revere in a storm so brutal that branches shattered against her face. She rallied hundreds of militia members. But she vanished from the record because she was a girl. These were people who shaped the identity, laws, and conscience of the new nation. Not all of America's defining moments were noble. In 1940, the world was at war. Europe collapsed. Asia burned. And America, still recovering from the Great Depression, faced a terrifying question. Could the nation survive a world dominated by dictators? A small group of scientists believed they had an answer. They gathered in secret rooms beneath the University of Chicago and in the deserts of New Mexico. They were not working on tanks or rifles or planes. They were working on something far more powerful. A weapon that would change the world. The atomic bomb. Some of these scientists were refugees who had fled Nazi persecution. Others were brilliant misfits, mathematicians with no homeland. Together, they designed a machine that split atoms and unleashed forces older than the stars. The government called the project Manhattan, but those involved called it something else. The gamble that could save democracy or destroy humanity. In 1945, when the first test lit up the desert sky, one physicist whispered, "We have crossed a boundary we cannot return from." That explosion did more than end a war. It launched the Cold War. It shaped every American presidency that followed. It defined who the United States became. A superpower feared, admired, and watched by the world. But what history rarely mentions is the moment engineered by a single vote. A vote in Congress to fund the project when it was still a fringe idea. If one senator had changed his mind, the bomb would have been built by someone else. And America would not have become the dominant power of the 20th century, only to be erased by time. But history remembers and whispers. And tonight, their whispers become voices again. During the Cold War, America lived under the shadow of annihilation. But one day, one terrifying, forgotten day, the world came within 3 minutes of ending. It was November 9, 1979. At NORAD headquarters, alarms exploded. Screens lit up with flashing red warnings. Soviet missile launch. 2,200 targets locked on the United States. Generals scrambled. Phones rang. Nuclear bombers were fueled. Missile crews were ordered to stand by for retaliation. It was chaos. The kind of chaos the public never hears about. And then, a young officer noticed something unusual. He checked the trajectory. Then checked again. The patterns looked familiar, too familiar. He realized the screens were running a training simulation that had accidentally mixed with the real early warning system. He shouted for the commander. They aborted the alert. If he had stayed silent for even a few minutes, America would have launched nuclear weapons. The Soviets would have retaliated, and civilization as we know it would no longer exist. One glitch, one training file, one ordinary officer who refused to panic. That is how close America. There are moments the nation celebrates, and moments it tries to forget. Whole communities built the American dream, only to watch it disappear. In the Great Plains, towns once bustling with life, schools, theaters, parades, emptied out until only dust remained. They weren't defeated by war or politics, but by winds, drought, and silence. In the Deep South, thousands of freedmen built prosperous black towns, dozens of them, only to watch them erased by violence, fire, and forced relocation. In the West, immigrant railway workers risked their lives blasting through mountains connecting the nation, yet were denied citizenship, land, and in many cases even a proper burial. These stories aren't tragic because they happened. They're tragic because they were allowed to be forgotten. But a nation is not just built by its triumphs. It is shaped by its losses. And America's identity is carved from the people who dreamed, even when the dream never came true. At the beginning of this story, you learned that America has secrets. But the truth is harder to hear. America doesn't just hide its history. America forgets it. Not because we want to. Not because someone orders it. But because remembering is painful. It forces us to confront the fragility of freedom, the cost of leadership, the weight of decisions made by imperfect humans, the terrifying, breathtaking chance, that the United States exists only because of a few nights, a few choices, a few people who refused to stay silent, a teenage soldier who trusted his instincts, a president who signed a trembling signature, a girl who rode alone in the storm, scientists who changed the balance of the world, an officer who questioned a blinking screen. These aren't just stories. They're reminders. Reminders that history doesn't move in straight lines. It moves in fragile moments. Moments where everything hangs by a thread. And tonight, you walk through those threads. Music swells slowly, then softens. The next time someone tells you America's story is simple, you'll know the truth. It was never simple. It was never easy. And it was never guaranteed. But it is ours. And these are the hidden historical tales that shaped the United States of America, came to its final day,